2 minutes before the lawyer unfolded the last page, my brother slid a $1 bill across the polished oak table and whispered, "At least now your inheritance matches your value." I didn't pick it up. I didn't answer him. I simply looked at the envelope resting beside the attorney's leather folder, the only document in the room that nobody else seemed to notice. By the end of that afternoon, every laugh in that room had disappeared, but none of us knew that yet. Welcome back to Reality Drama Story, where family secrets unfold and quiet decisions change everything. If you are new here, drop a comment and subscribe. Now let's get into it. My name is Claire. I was born into a family that believed appearances were almost as important as honesty. My father, William Carter, built Carter Industrial Supply from a rented warehouse with one delivery truck and a second-hand desk. By the time I graduated from college, the company employed nearly 400 people across 3 states. People liked to call him self-made. He never corrected them. When I was 8 years old, he took me to one of the warehouses on a rainy Saturday morning. I remember standing inside wearing boots that were 2 sizes too big because my mother insisted I would grow into them. An elderly warehouse supervisor named Frank handed me a measuring tape. "Buildings don't stand because they look pretty," he said while showing me stacks of steel beams. "They stand because every hidden piece carries its weight." At 8 years old, I thought he was talking about warehouses. Years later, I realized he had been talking about people. Frank became something of a mentor to me. He had worked with my father since the company's earliest days. While other adults complimented my grades or my dresses, Frank taught me practical things. Always read the second page of a contract. Always ask why a number changed. Always notice who treats employees the same way they treat investors. He said character left fingerprints long before mistakes became public. I carried those lessons quietly. My older brother, Ethan, carried something different: expectation. He was 3 years older than me and had been introduced as the future of the company before he was old enough to drive. Nobody questioned it, not because he was the most capable, because he was the oldest son. At family dinners, my father asked Ethan about expansion plans. He asked me whether I was still enjoying architecture school. Neither question sounded unfair by itself. Together, they built a pattern. Architecture wasn't my father's first choice for me. He preferred business school, but I loved structures. Not because I dreamed about designing skyscrapers, because buildings made sense. If something cracked, there was a reason. If something leaned, there was a cause. People weren't always that honest. After graduation, I surprised everyone by refusing offers from large firms and joining Carter Industrial Supply instead. Officially, I became director of facilities planning. Unofficially, I solved problems nobody wanted attached to their names: broken leases, delayed permits, insurance inspections, safety upgrades, projects that never appeared in shareholder presentations. Whenever something difficult happened, my father called me. Whenever something successful happened, Ethan held the press conference. I accepted that arrangement longer than I should have. Then everything began changing. Not all at once. Slowly, like a blueprint being erased one careful line at a time. The first sign arrived after my mother passed away. Cancer moved faster than any of us expected. Her absence left an empty chair that nobody could stop looking at. A year later, my father married Diane. She was polished, always perfectly dressed, always perfectly composed. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She could redirect an entire conversation with a single sentence. "I think William meant," or "Claire probably doesn't understand the financial side." She never insulted me directly. She simply translated my words until they sounded smaller. Her son, Mason, came with her. He was polite enough to wait 6 months before referring to Carter Industrial Supply as our company. He had never worked there. Not one day. Still, people smiled politely. I noticed something else. Within 18 months, longtime employees started retiring earlier than expected. Frank retired, then Sandra from accounting, then Victor from logistics. One by one, each farewell dinner felt ordinary. Each replacement arrived through someone Diane happened to know. Coincidence is possible once, maybe twice. After that, it deserves attention. I began reviewing company reports during evenings after everyone left. Nothing dramatic, just numbers. Vendor contracts, property leases, maintenance costs. Most people see spreadsheets as rows of numbers. Architects see stress points. Certain expenses grew without explanation. Consulting fees doubled. Marketing budgets expanded. Office renovations appeared for buildings that had never been renovated. Every discrepancy was small enough to avoid questions. Together they resembled tiny cracks spreading across a foundation. I mentioned my concerns to Ethan. He laughed. You always think like an engineer. I think like someone reading invoices. Same difference. It isn't. He smiled the way people smile when they have already decided the conversation is over. Our father trusted him. That mattered more than evidence. For another 2 years, I kept working. Quietly. Every project I completed increased company value. Every improvement saved money. I documented everything because Frank had once told me documentation was memory that couldn't be interrupted. Then came the board meeting that changed everything. There were 11 people around the conference table. I remember because I counted them while waiting for the presentation to begin. Ethan presented a proposal to sell 2 distribution centers. He claimed maintenance costs were becoming unreasonable. I knew those buildings better than anyone. 3 months earlier, I had completed structural evaluations. Both facilities had at least 20 years of useful life remaining. I raised my hand. May I ask a question? Ethan nodded without looking at me. What maintenance report are you using? The latest one. I prepared the latest one. Silence. He flipped through his binder. Then Diane spoke. I'm sure there's simply been an update. There hasn't. The room became still. Not dramatic, just uncomfortable. My father looked toward me, then toward Ethan. Finally, he said something that stayed with me for months. We'll discuss it later. We never did. The properties sold 6 weeks afterward. No further discussion. No revised report. Just signatures. That evening I drove home wondering whether I was imagining everything. Sometimes betrayal doesn't begin with lies. Sometimes it begins with people deciding your questions are less convenient than their answers. 3 months later, my father suffered a heart attack. He survived, technically, but recovery changed him. He attended fewer meetings, signed more documents at home, delegated nearly everything to Ethan. Diane managed his schedule. Nobody reached him without going through her first, including me. I brought homemade soup one afternoon. The housekeeper met me at the front door. Diane says he's resting. I only need 5 minutes. She said no visitors. As I turned back toward my car, I noticed movement upstairs. My father stood by the bedroom window, watching. He lifted one hand, just slightly. I waved back. Then the curtain closed. Something about that moment refused to leave me. Not because he looked weak. Because he looked like someone waiting for permission inside his own home. A week later, I received a handwritten note. No return address. No signature. Just one sentence. Don't stop keeping copies. You'll need every one of them someday. The handwriting looked familiar. I couldn't place it. But whoever wrote it knew 2 things. First, they knew I kept records. Second, they believed those records would eventually matter. So I continued. Every invoice, every property valuation, every email confirming project approvals, every signed maintenance report. I stored digital copies in 3 locations, paper copies in 1 locked cabinet, and 1 complete archive inside a sealed fireproof box at my house. Not because I expected a battle, because foundations are tested long before buildings collapse. 6 months later, my father's health declined again. This time, he never returned to the office. The final conversation we had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 32 seconds. He sounded tired, not frightened, just disappointed. Claire, I'm here. I hope you never confuse being quiet with giving up. I won't. There was a pause. Then he said something I didn't understand until much later. When they read it, let everyone finish talking. What do you mean? Another pause. Longer this time. You'll understand. The line disconnected. Those were the last words my father ever spoke to me. 4 days later, the phone rang before sunrise. And 3 weeks after we buried him, our entire family gathered inside Harrison and Cole attorneys for the reading of his will. None of them noticed the second envelope resting beneath the lawyer's hand. I did, and for reasons I couldn't yet explain. I couldn't stop looking at it. 3 weeks after we buried my father, 11 chairs surrounded the conference table inside Harrison and Cole. The room was almost too comfortable. Thick carpet, soft lighting, coffee that no one seemed interested in drinking. Grief has a way of making expensive rooms feel temporary. I counted the people before I sat down. My brother Ethan, my stepmother Diane, her son Mason, 3 board members, 2 attorneys from the firm, the company's chief financial officer, our longtime family accountant, and me, 11. The same number of people who had been present during that board meeting months earlier. The coincidence wasn't important, but I noticed it anyway. The attorney, Mr. Harrison, waited until everyone settled before opening the leather folder in front of him. My condolences, he began. Mr. William Carter revised his estate plan approximately 14 months ago. My responsibility today is simply to read and execute his instructions. No one interrupted. Ethan sat with one arm stretched across the back of his chair as though he were already hosting the meeting. Diane folded her hands with perfect posture. Mason looked at his phone until one of the attorneys quietly asked him to put it away. Then the reading began. The lake house went to Diane. The vacation cabin in Montana would be sold, with the proceeds divided according to the estate schedule. Several charitable donations were listed, each with exact amounts. Employees who had worked for the company for more than 25 years received individual gifts ranging from $10,000 to $50,000. That surprised me. It also sounded exactly like my father. He never forgot the people who had built the business beside him. Then came the company. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses. Control of Carter Industrial Supply shall transfer according to the ownership schedule described in Appendix C. Ethan smiled before the attorney even continued. He expected applause. Instead, Mr. Harrison calmly read percentages. Existing voting shares, preferred shares, trust allocations, family interests. The numbers sounded complicated enough that most people simply nodded. I didn't. Something was missing. Not incorrect. Incomplete. There was a difference. Then my name appeared. To my daughter, Claire Carter. Everyone looked toward me. I leave $1 United States dollar. Silence! Then someone laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. Mason couldn't help himself. $1? He covered his mouth as though pretending it had slipped out. Ethan leaned back. I guess Dad wanted everything balanced. A board member chuckled politely. Diane lowered her eyes, attempting to appear uncomfortable while making absolutely no effort to stop the moment. Then Ethan reached into his wallet. He removed a crisp $1 bill and slid it across the polished table toward me. Here, he said quietly. Now you have two. More laughter. Not cruel. Almost worse. Dismissive. As though everyone had already agreed on the ending before hearing the full story. I looked at the dollar bill. I left it exactly where it stopped. Mr. Harrison did something unexpected. He did not continue reading. Instead, he closed the folder. Then he looked directly at me. Miss Carter. Yes? Before I proceed, your father instructed me to ask you one question. Every conversation stopped. What question? He opened a sealed handwritten note. Do you still have the blue box? For the first time that afternoon, my heart skipped. The blue box. Almost no one knew it existed. Years earlier, after helping reorganize one of the company's storage buildings, I had found an old metal document box scheduled for disposal. It wasn't valuable, just sturdy. I cleaned it, painted it dark blue, and jokingly told my father it was becoming my disaster archive. He laughed. Every engineer needs one. From that day forward, I stored copies of important project files inside it. Not company secrets. Just records I believed should never disappear. I hadn't thought about that conversation in years. Yes, I answered. I still have it. Mr. Harrison nodded once. Then he reached beneath the table and placed a second envelope beside his folder, the one I had noticed when I entered. Unlike the first documents, this envelope carried 3 signatures across the seal. My father's, Mr. Harrison's, and another signature. Frank Dawson. I almost forgot to breathe. Frank had retired nearly 3 years earlier. No one else around the table seemed to recognize his name. I did. The warehouse supervisor. The man who taught me to measure twice. The man who believed hidden beams mattered more than polished walls. Mr. Harrison carefully broke the seal. Ethan frowned. What is that? A supplemental instruction. I thought the wool was finished. It is. Then why are we still here? The attorney didn't answer immediately. Instead, he unfolded several pages. The following instructions become active only if one specific condition has been met. Mason laughed softly. What condition? Mr. Harrison looked toward me again. That Claire Carter arrives with possession of the blue document archive. Every eye in the room shifted toward me. I didn't bring it, I said honestly. It wasn't requested. Correct. He nodded. Mr. Carter expected that. Ethan crossed his arms. This is ridiculous. The attorney ignored him. He continued reading. If Claire still protected the records without being reminded, then she has already proven the quality I spent 30 years trying to teach. The room became noticeably quieter. If she discarded them, burned the remaining pages without opening them, no one moved. Mr. Harrison continued. If she kept them. Another pause. Then proceed to Article 9. He turned the page. I noticed the date at the bottom. 14 months earlier. Exactly when my father had rewritten his estate plan. Article 9. Operational Integrity Review. Even the company accountant looked confused. This isn't standard estate language. One board member whispered. No. Mr. Harrison replied calmly. It isn't. He looked directly at Ethan. Because this section concerns corporate governance rather than inheritance. My brother's confidence faded just slightly. What exactly does that mean? It means your father separated ownership from control. The room felt smaller. Diane finally spoke. William never mentioned that. He wasn't required to. But Ethan inherited the company. Mr. Harrison folded his hands. He inherited shares. That's the same thing. No. One word. Quietly spoken, yet somehow heavier than anything else that afternoon. No, Mrs. Carter. He opened another page. Your husband created what is legally known as a contingent governance provision. No one answered. Most of the people in the room probably had no idea what that meant. I only understood pieces of it. The attorney explained. Ownership determines who benefits financially. Governance determines who has legal authority to make certain operational decisions. He slid a document across the table. The two are not always identical. The chief financial officer leaned forward. I've never seen this. You weren't supposed to. It wasn't filed? It was. Where? The corporate trust registry. Silence! Mr. Harrison continued. Under this provision, the individual responsible for certifying major property transactions, executive audits, and structural asset verification was designated 14 months ago. I felt something tightening in my chest. Not excitement, recognition. 14 months. That was shortly after the board meeting about selling those distribution centers. The timing suddenly mattered. A lot. Ethan shook his head. So who is this mystery person? Mr. Harrison didn't answer. Instead, he read directly from my father's signed instruction. A company I built cannot survive if people stop asking difficult questions. Another sentence. The leadership belongs to the person willing to verify before approving. Then another. Therefore. He stopped, folded the page, looked directly at me. Before anyone else could speak, Diane interrupted. This is absurd. Claire has never even wanted to run the company. She sounded calm. Too calm. As though she needed the room to believe she wasn't worried. I almost corrected her, but my father's last words echoed inside my head. Let everyone finish talking. So I stayed silent, exactly as he had asked. Ethan laughed again, although this time it sounded forced. Whatever this says, it changes nothing. No one responded, not even the board members. Mr. Harrison slowly unfolded the final page. The remainder of Article 9, he said, requires verification using documents that only one person was instructed to preserve. His eyes settled on me one final time. Ems, Carter, do you still have every copy? I thought about the blue metal box sitting inside the fireproof cabinet in my study. Every invoice, every engineering report, every signed inspection, every email, every property valuation. Exactly as Frank had taught me. Exactly as my father had quietly hoped. I met the attorney's eyes. Then I answered with the only sentence that suddenly mattered. Yes. And for the first time all afternoon, no one in the room laughed anymore. The word barely rose above a conversation level, yet it seemed to settle over the conference room with more weight than any raised voice could have carried. Mr. Harrison nodded once. Then I believe your father anticipated today's outcome accurately. He reached into his briefcase and removed a slim binder with a blue tab attached to the side. The documents in your possession will need to be verified before they become part of the permanent corporate record. However, your father instructed me to explain why they matter before we review a single page. Ethan leaned forward. Can we stop speaking in riddles? We can, Mr. Harrison replied. In fact, that's exactly what your father wanted. He turned another page. 14 months ago, Mr. Carter became concerned that several major company transactions were being approved without adequate supporting documentation. The chief financial officer frowned. I remembered those discussions. You should. Mr. Harrison slid a memorandum toward him. You attended the meeting. The CFO adjusted his glasses and quietly read the first paragraph. His expression changed. I had forgotten this. You weren't expected to remember, Mr. Harrison said. That's why records exist. He continued reading. Effective January 12th, all property sales exceeding $5 million shall require verification against the original engineering assessments prepared by Claire Carter or an equivalent licensed professional. The room became silent again. I recognized the date immediately. January 12th. The very week after I challenged the proposal to sell the distribution centers. My father hadn't ignored my concerns. He had acted on them. Quietly. Without announcing it to anyone. Mr. Harrison continued. Furthermore, If supporting reports are altered, replaced, or omitted, the transaction is automatically subject to independent review. Ethan shook his head. Those properties were sold legally. Perhaps. The attorney answered calmly. Today isn't about assumptions. It's about documentation. For the next 40 minutes, we reviewed transaction after transaction. No accusations. No dramatic speeches. Just paper, dates, signatures, numbers. The first file involved the Western Distribution Center. The version presented to the board listed nearly $6 million in anticipated structural repairs. Mr. Harrison looked toward me. Do you recognize this report? I recognize the building, but not the report. No. He handed me another document. My original inspection. My signature. My engineering license number. Estimated repairs. $482,000. Not $6 million. The room grew noticeably quieter. The CFO compared both reports line by line. The page numbers match. He stopped, then looked closer. Except someone replaced the maintenance summary. Mr. Harrison nodded. The original remained in Mr. Carter's secure archive. Ethan crossed his arms. That proves nothing. No, I said calmly. It proves someone edited a certified engineering document. No one answered. The second file concerned a consulting contract. Then another. Then another. Every discrepancy looked small on its own. A payment redirected here. An inflated estimate there. A duplicated invoice approved months apart. Nothing theatrical. Just enough to slowly redirect company money without attracting attention. It reminded me of a building with dozens of tiny foundation cracks. Any single crack could be ignored. Together, they threatened everything standing above them. Diane finally broke the silence. William trusted all of us. Mr. Harrison looked at her. He trusted the documentation more. That sentence settled over the room like concrete. Ethan stood. This has become a witch hunt. No, the attorney replied. It has become an audit. There was an important difference. Audits don't ask who people are. They ask what the records say. Mr. Harrison opened the final section of the binder. Now we arrive at the contingent governance provision. The board members leaned forward. So who controls the company? One of them asked. The attorney smiled politely. Mr. Carter anticipated that question. He read directly from the signed instruction. Ownership without accountability weakens every foundation. Another line followed. Therefore, voting shares alone shall not authorize executive control unless the holder receives certification from the independent operations trustee. The CFO looked puzzled. We have an operations trustee. We do. Who? Mr. Harrison folded the page before answering. The position became effective immediately upon Mr. Carter's passing. Ethan laughed. I assume that's another mystery. It isn't. The attorney looked directly at me. Claire Carter. No one spoke, not even Mason. Mr. Harrison continued. You did not inherit control because you were his daughter. He paused. You inherited responsibility because you spent years preserving evidence without knowing anyone would ever ask for it. The words landed differently than I expected. I hadn't won anything. I had simply refused to throw important things away. That was all. The attorney continued explaining. The trustee cannot sell company assets. The trustee cannot collect executive bonuses. The trustee cannot appoint family members. So what can she do? Asked one board member. She can approve or refuse major corporate actions until an independent governance review is complete. For how long? 90 days. Only 90. My father hadn't wanted permanent family power. He wanted time. Time for facts. Time for verification. Time for the company to breathe before irreversible decisions could be made. Ethan's confidence finally disappeared. This is insane. No, said the CFO quietly. It's careful. Everyone turned toward him. He removed his company identification badge and placed it gently on the table. I've worked here 27 years. His voice remained steady. I should have questioned more. He looked at me. You asked difficult questions. And then he looked at Ethan. We laughed instead of listening. Those words carried more weight than any accusation. Diane tried another approach. Her voice softened. Claire, we're family. I met her eyes. We are. We don't need lawyers deciding everything. They aren't. They're only following paperwork. Exactly. She hesitated. We can settle this privately. I thought about my father's final phone call. Don't confuse being quiet with giving up. Being quiet never meant avoiding truth. It meant allowing truth to arrive without unnecessary noise. I'm not interested in embarrassing anyone, I said. I'm interested in understanding every transaction. Her expression changed. The calm certainty disappeared. For the first time, uncertainty took its place. Mason sighed heavily. This is going to destroy the company. No, I answered. Hidden problems destroy companies. Finding them gives businesses a chance to survive. No one argued, because no one could. Within 48 hours, an independent forensic accounting firm began reviewing the records. Not because I demanded it, because my father's governance clause required it. 90 days later, the review was complete. The findings surprised almost everyone. No evidence suggested my father had been robbed of millions overnight. Instead, investigators found years of poor oversight, altered internal reports, unnecessary consulting agreements, and approval procedures that had gradually drifted away from the standards he originally established. The estimated financial impact totaled just over $8.4 million spread across several years. Enough to matter. Enough to correct. Several contracts were canceled. Corporate policies were rewritten. Future property sales required independent engineering certification. Every executive expense above $50,000 required dual approval. The board voted unanimously to adopt the recommendations permanently. Ethan remained a shareholder, but he resigned as chief executive officer 2 weeks later. The decision came from the board, not from me. Diane sold the lake house the following spring and moved closer to her sister. Our conversations eventually became polite. Never close, but polite. Sometimes that is the healthiest ending two people can realistically reach. As for me, I never became CEO. I never wanted the title. Instead, the board asked me to oversee corporate governance and operational integrity. It suited me perfectly. Blueprints had always interested me more than corner offices. Several months after everything ended, Frank's daughter contacted me. Frank had passed away quietly during retirement, only a few months before my father's death. She asked if I wanted something they found while cleaning his garage. It was an old measuring tape, the same one he had placed in my hands when I was 8 years old. Its metal surface was scratched. The numbers had faded, but it still locked into place with the same sharp click I remembered. Inside the box was a folded note written in Frank's handwriting. Measure carefully, especially people. That measuring tape now sits on the bookshelf in my office. Visitors probably think it's an ordinary old tool. It isn't. It's a reminder that strong foundations are rarely visible. They simply keep everything else from collapsing. My brother's $1 bill also found its way back to me. Not because I kept it, because someone from the law office mailed it after the meeting. I placed it inside a small frame beside Frank's note. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. People often mistake value for appearance. Sometimes the smallest inheritance points toward the greatest responsibility. My father understood that. Eventually. So did I. This is not revenge. This is arithmetic. If this story reminded you to know your worth, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, drop a comment, and I will see you in the next one.